George Clooney decided to sell Casamigos at $1 billion.
So we kind of came up with what we thought was the perfect recipe. We were drinking different tequilas. We didn't really love anything. We decided to make our own, but just for ourselves, right? They said, if you do 20,000 cases your first year, it'll be a huge success. We sold the 20,000 cases the first 2 days. When I started Discovery, I did it to make golf fun. The irony of all this is I never golfed when I started Discovery, and I was never a member of a country club in my life. And a lot of people who develop golf courses are very traditional to the rules of golf, but I wasn't. I feel like I built one of the great luxury brands in the world. I had no roadmap, I had no mentor, I had no preparation. I just had to wing it and figure things out. And now that I've done so much of it, it's a lot.
You recently purchased 7.5% of the Las Vegas Raiders at rumored to be a $6 billion valuation. That means you wrote a check for $450 million.
I'm happy to be part of the Raiders. It got us vested very quickly and excited. Together we feel like we had a great draft, we have a great front office, we have a great coaching staff, and we're completely excited, invested in it.
You've had such incredible success. When you look back and you think about it, I think it's fair to say if you're a billionaire today, you have homes all over the world, you hang out with celebrities, you have a G650 Gulfstream jet, you're a single good-looking guy. How great is it to be Mike Meldman?
Well, I'm pretty happy. The most proud about it is I really created myself, started with no money, and the whole reason I did it was to spend time with my kids.
Welcome to In Search of Excellence. My guest today is Mike Meldman. Mike is a real estate guru, the founder of Discovery Land Company, which operates 36 high-end luxury resort properties around the world. He's a co-founder of Casamigos Tequila, which sold a few years ago for $1 billion. He's an amazing investor, many companies including Viori's, and he's the new owner of the Las Vegas Raiders. Mike, welcome to In Search of Excellence. Thanks for being here. I always start with family because it shapes our futures and who we grow into. Your mom, Maggie, was a travel writer.
Margie, yeah.
Margie was a travel writer. Your dad, Bert, went to law school, didn't practice, sold insurance. And I want to talk about, they went on a trip to Thailand in 1998, and your mom wrote this blog about he was wined and dined his whole life because he was so successful in terms of he hit his quota and he went all on these trips around the world. So what was it like watching your dad sell insurance? That's not a product that we wake up one day and say, I need life insurance today. Someone calls you up and say, hey, you want to buy some life insurance?
Yeah, so my dad was a true salesman, right? And he was, successful. But we lived, and I grew up, I would say, a very, nice life, very middle class. Didn't really want for anything, but anything I wanted, I had to go earn by working, right? So if I wanted a bike, I went out and got a job and bought a bike. So it was a happy life. My parents were great. My dad was always there when I went to school. He was always there when I got home from school. He coached me all my sports, Little League, football. So he's a great, great family life, living in Milwaukee.
Did your dad tell you what he did at a young age and he explained to you, hey, this is how I go out and sell something?
No, I can't remember what grade I was in, but I did a report on selling life insurance. And the only thing I really remember from it was the word breadwinner, because everything in the insurance business seemed to be about the breadwinner. And so that was kind of the thesis of my report when I was in 3rd or 4th grade. And I remember always going to the office with him, like on a weekend when no one was there, and going to the general agent's office and sitting in the big chair. And my dad said, someday this could be yours.
Parents watching them, what they do, very influential in my life, and I know in your life too. When your dad was your coach in Little League, he would often prop up the kids who weren't doing so well or who weren't good. What was that like, watching your dad do that to people who, you know, as a kid, I wasn't a great baseball player, and I didn't have a coach who said, hey man, come on. You just didn't play if you weren't good.
Yeah, well, my dad was the opposite. My dad was a great coach, and he made everyone play. And I remember this I still remember it. It's a big impact, made a big impact on my life. We were probably in third or fourth grade, and we were in the softball championship game. The rule was everyone had to play.
You played softball, not a fast pitch?
This was softball, because we were probably too young for hardball at the time. Or it might have been hardball, I can't remember. But, you know, we didn't have t-ball or anything like that. So it was a baseball game. We were like down by 1 run. We had 2 outs, and my dad realized that Randy Burns didn't play. The rule was everyone had to play. So my dad put Randy Burns in, 2 outs, we're down by 1. I don't know if bases were loaded. I don't know if it was quite that dramatic. But Randy went up and he struck out, and we lost the game. And everybody went up to Randy and kind of consoled him and hugged him. And my dad's speech to us was, the other team, who was like the other neighborhood team who we knew all the players, they didn't play everyone. So they didn't play fair. We played fair, so, we could be proud of ourselves and hold our heads high. And, even though we lost, that took the sting away. And even though Randy, struck out, no one was mad or, angry or a bad sport about it, because we realized we did the right thing and played by the rules.
You were also close with your grandfather, and I want to know his influence in your life, and I also want you to talk about Thomas Jefferson as well.
Okay. Well, yeah, my grandfather and my dad were probably the 2 most influential people in my life, because they always did the right thing. My grandfather set a great example. We called him the gum grandpa.
The gump grandpa?
The gum
grandpa.
Because every time he came over, he would have, the round gum balls. So we would all run over for gum, and let's say we're playing football in the front yard, all my friends would run over and they go, the gum grandpa's here, and we'd all get a piece of gum. So that was kind of his trademark. And every Sunday when we'd go to his house for dinner, he'd bring us all to Baskin Robbins for ice cream. He was a lawyer, a great guy. Everyone loved him. All us cousins loved him, and he, just him and my dad, like I said, they just always did the right thing. Obviously, that was a great lesson for me and inspiration for me.
You're known to have a great personality. I think people that have great personalities generally do better than people who don't. Tell us about in high school. Tell everyone what the Key Club is, and then tell everybody about you ran for governor against your best friend, and it was a total slaughter at that point.
Yeah, that was Boy State. There's Key Club was a service organization that was sponsored by Qantas. Like, all the football players were in it, like all the cool guys were in it. So when I was a sophomore, I became a member just because the juniors and seniors on our football team were in it, so I thought it was cool. And then they had these conventions, and we were in a 3-state Key Club division. It was Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas. And so by the time I was a junior, I ended up running for governor. I won, and so I was a governor for those 3 states, or 2.5 states. The reason I wanted to be governor is because I was at the Key Club convention the year before, and the governor got to pick the Key Club sweethearts. And so he got like pictures and resumes from, hundreds of different girls from the different high schools. So I go, that sounds cool. And so that was literally the reason why I ran for governor.
What do you do, by the way, as governor?
I basically visited different high schools across, Arizona, New Mexico, West Texas, met with the different Key Clubs, talked about what Key Club is, what we were doing, things like that. So I was, it's kind of just a figurehead. But Key Club was a service organization. And like what I remember mostly from what I did at Key Club, I coached Special Olympics. And the person I coached like won 2 years in a row. So that was something I was, proud of. But you did stuff like that, right? You had car washes and raised money for certain causes. It just taught you to give back, to give back. And so it was a good lesson and something part of the core of who I am is giving back. From Key Club, then I went to Boys State, and Boys State is sponsored by the American Legion. The idea behind Boys State is you take the best all-around students and they go to Boys State. So my high school happened to be a big high school. I had probably 3,000 kids in my high school. We got 5 people who got to go to Boys State. I was one of the 5. My best friend, 2 of my best friends, Eric Hedlund and Robbie Robinson, were also selected to go to Boys State. So we go. My roommate was Eric Hedlund, my best friend. You have it's a mock government basically. So I lived in a city called Orth. So you started with the city government, then a county government, and then the state government. And everyone, was, nationalist or federalist, whatever. There's 2 parties. So it's basically to teach you about government. For governor, I ran against my roommate, which was weird, who's my best friend, and we both went to the same high school. So all this was kind of strange. Usually the person wins by 3 or 4 votes because you'll get your friends from your high school to vote for you and cross party lines. And so I ended up winning by 60 votes, which was historic because everyone knew me as Key Club governor. So I had a huge advantage actually.
On the student front, you had straight A's. You go to Stanford, history major, fraternity guy. You promoted concerts. You were a Deadhead fan. Tell us about this bar I think it was called The Pen, and then blasting rock and roll music over the ocean. And then we can flip into the rock and roll at the golf clubs a little bit later in the show.
Okay. The Nepenthe was the bar.
The Nepenthe.
The Nepenthe is a place in Big Sur that kind of overlooks the ocean and the forests of Big Sur. And it's kind of a hamburger joint. And so I used to go down there if I was in Carmel or even drive from Stanford, if I had a date that I wanted, to impress. And we'd go there, and like I said, it was a hamburger joint. You'd sit over looking at the forests and trees, and they just blasted rock and roll. And so I always liked that. I kind of, grew up in the rock and roll era. I've always had an affinity for classic rock. When I started Discovery, I would, on the golf course at the driving range, I'd blast classic rock that came from, all those burgers and beers I had in the Nepenthe. But I also did it to make golf fun. And the irony of all this is I never golfed when I started Discovery, and I was never a member of a country club in my life. So I didn't, grow up like a golf snob. And a lot of people who develop golf courses are very traditional to the rules of golf, but I wasn't. So blasting rock and roll just made it more fun for me. I'd go to the driving range and try to learn how to golf, and at least I sucked. So at least I had rock and roll to listen to.
I grew up in Detroit, classic rock guy. Rush is my favorite band of all time. I've seen them.
Detroit's got a lot of rockers.
A lot of rockers. How did you become a promoter at Stanford? Because was this just something, hey, I'm a popular guy, I want to get people together, I want to get everyone in a room and make money?
No, it was more that my friends were in charge of whatever it was called, the Associated Students of Stanford, and they basically did these concerts. And so I was living there in the summer, so they got me and my best friend Bill Maloney involved. And so what we would do, we were in charge of hospitality, which is kind of ironic now. And so we'd go, if it was Joan Baez, we'd go to, it was probably before Costco, but we'd go somewhere and buy granola bars and things that the Joan Baez crowd would eat. I remember doing Huey Lewis's first concert I think it was Huey Lewis, Pogo, and Dave Mason. And Huey Lewis, was like in the back of the stage and just like sticking food in his pocket, and
He was stealing food?
Yeah, I mean, he just, he's a young kid who, it was his first show. And I remember we had to go to him and go, look, don't steal the food. You're welcome to it, and kind of teach him how to behave, because he's probably stoned out of his mind or something. But it was kind of funny because he's obviously turned into a big star.
College today is a big topic among parents. Should we go? Should we not go? 57% of kids who go to college take on debt. The average debt's $30,000. Takes 20 years to pay off. These are 10-year loans, even though it takes 20 years to pay off. And we'll go through your jobs one by one, but should kids go to college today? Do they need to go to college?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think besides the education, the socialization and the people you meet is important for life. Like, my friends from college are still my best friends. So I think, yeah, it's very important. But I also, my best friends from high school I'm still close with, and my best friends from Milwaukee, from when I was really young, are still very close to me. So yeah, I think it's important for education and socialization.
So the plan was also, you grew up with a family of lawyers. Everyone went to Marquette Law from Milwaukee.
Yeah.
So you were going to go there until you weren't going to go there. So let's not jump ahead in terms of where you went next, but I'm curious. You said it was the best thing that happened to you in your life. I mean, I'm sure your kids.
I was destined to go to law school. My parents, spent a lot of money on my Stanford education.
$6,000 at the time was a lot of money.
It was $6,000 a quarter.
A quarter.
So it was $18,000 a year. Whatever it was a lot. I worked a lot and made a lot of money when I was in college. The whole idea of sending me to Stanford was that I would then go to law school and be a lawyer. And so I took the LSATs, and I probably hung over, didn't realize what the LSATs were, and how important they were. And I had good grades at Stanford, so the grades weren't really an issue. I just bombed the LSATs. I don't even remember what I got, but it was a low enough score that I was too embarrassed to apply to law school. Maybe I got my name right. Other than that, I don't know really what happened. I went to Lake Tahoe with three of my buddies from college, played or learned how to deal blackjack. And so I went to 2 weeks of blackjack school, graduated, and I think graduating blackjack school is more exciting than graduating Stanford. And I dealt blackjack at Harris for the summer. And I met a guy, and he basically said to me, do you want to make as much money as you want and work as little as you want? And I go, yeah, sounds like a great idea. So I started as a commercial real estate broker in San Jose.
Let's back up a few steps if we can. So you didn't have a plan B when you didn't go to law school, right? So should people have a plan B? Because right now I think people say you got to go for it, you got to go for it. And if you have a plan B, you're not going to be as successful as if you're focused on one plan.
Well, I guess you should have a plan B. I didn't. It's kind of funny because I was the only one who went into real estate for my college class, or even all 4 classes when I was at Stanford. Everyone went into technology. I was kind of the outlier, but it worked out because all those guys ended up buying in my projects once I got to the place where I had projects. I always thought I was a history major, so I didn't have any real technical skills or training or expertise. Like my friends who are electrical engineers or mechanical engineers. Stanford's a liberal arts school. Like when I was going through the interviewing process with different companies, my line was, it's not what you learned, it's that you're capable of learning. And that was kind of, my philosophy at Stanford, because with a history major, you either go to law school or you teach history. And I actually would have been fine teaching history because I liked doing that.
I also went to law school, but I went to Michigan before I went to Northwestern Law School. Didn't test well getting into Michigan, but I did well at a private school. I graduated magna cum laude in very difficult private school. And then I went to Michigan and I graduated top 1% of my class there. Not because I'm the smartest person in the room. I think if you are, you're in the wrong room. But I worked very, very hard. I was at the library till 10 o'clock at night when nobody was there. Wanted to go to law school. Well, I actually wanted to go to business school, but knew I wasn't going to test well. They made you work for 2 years. I needed to get out and make money. So I also took the test and got a 36 of 48. I think it was something like the 58 or 60th percentile. My friends who did as well went to best schools, Harvard, Stanford. Of course, I got rejected, and I don't know how it happened, but my backup school was Northwestern, and I went there. That was a good thing I went there. But I hated law school, so maybe you didn't miss that much. We all have menial jobs that we do. I waited tables in law school. I waited tables in college. I bagged groceries in high school for extra money to go on dates. I had a long distance phone bill I had to pay. You worked at Lucky's twice. High school at Stanford in the summer. You were in a slaughterhouse, for lack of a better word, hanging cattle on
Arizona beef. It was a slaughterhouse.
A slaughterhouse. And then you worked on a rig as a roustabout. Tell everyone what a roustabout is, and then tell everyone how it was the first lesson in liability and insurance liability for people getting injured on that rig.
Yeah, so I was a roustabout, which is the low man on the totem pole on the oil rig.
Laborer, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, when there's nothing to do, I'd be like chipping paint and repainting, things on the boat. But I was really helping the crane operator. So when pipes came in or supplies came in, the crane would take it off the ship, the little tugboat that brought it out, and then it would bring it to the boat, and then I had to guide the pipes or the supplies and on the pallets onto the boat, and then unload everything. Pretty hard, hard labor. It was 12 hours on, 12 hours off for 2 weeks. So I was literally offshore for 2 weeks.
You would take a boat to this huge rig, the kind of rigs you see in the ocean?
We would leave Port Hueneme and go out, the Santa Barbara coast on the, one of the rigs. The first day out there, the guy who was teaching us, I went with a friend of mine, John Wolechka. The two of us did it together. And we had an experienced guy who was showing us the ropes, who actually got caught in between pipes and a pallet of stuff, had to be airlifted off the first day. So it was just the two of us. We knew nothing about what we were doing, so we just had to wasn't that hard. We had to try to stay safe. And before we took the job, they sent me a letter that basically I had to have my parents sign, and it basically gave an amount of money for each limb if I lost one.
What was the most expensive limb?
I can't remember, but I'm sure it was a leg.
The summer before my freshman year in college, I worked construction. I worked in this dirt pit that was going to be built the World Weight Watchers headquarters, and I was this skinny kid. I'm looking around and I was thinking to myself, this is definitely not what I want to do, but I think the hard labor is a very good experience to look around, and this is how most of the world works. When you were on that rig and we're hanging beef in a slaughterhouse, were you saying to yourself, I'm doing this for the money? And did it motivate you to say, all right, I'm definitely going to go out and I'm not going to do this for the rest of my life?
Well, I definitely did it for the money because they were hard jobs and they paid well. I think that 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, I was making $2,000 or $3,000, every 2 weeks. So I worked 3 2-week stints. I went into my senior year with $6,000 in the bank, so that was, meaningful, and probably should save some of it, but I had, a fun senior year. And I just, the hard work, like I said, I did for the money, but it's also good. I'm a pretty disciplined person, and so I didn't mind the physical labor because I was always trying to stay in shape or be in shape, and lugging cattle. I literally had to take the cattle, half the cattle's there. I'd go like this, they'd cut it off, and learned how to balance it on my shoulder, without even holding it, and then I'd have to throw it onto a meat hook on the truck, and then we'd drive to Safeway or Lucky's, and then I'd have to take the half of cattle off, or a quarter of it, off the truck into the butcher shop in the store. And I worked from 10 or 2 a.m. to 11 a.m. So it kind of screwed up my, my days. But it's hard work, and I liked it because it was physical.
You touch upon this already. You meet this guy who says you want to make as much money as possible, and so much of our success is taking a risk. It was a startup, and then a lot of our risk too is just being at the right place at the right time. So tell us about Fremont and its location in Silicon Valley, and then the cold calling experiences that you learned calling on a bunch of farmers.
Basically, the office was in San Jose in like an industrial park, so it wasn't glamorous. It wasn't, I had no mentor or anyone showing me the ropes. So my whole training was go to Fremont, and it was farmland. Look up, go to the microfiche, because at the time, you'd find the APN number and pull in this like microfiche and figure out who owned it, and then I'd go call on them and try to get a sign up. So my whole real estate career started by just putting signs up, and the guy said, put signs up, they're gonna call you, and then you sell them something. And so I did that, and I got signs up all over Fremont. People started calling, and I'd start, doing deals. And I had a really good knack for making deals. I think I made 50 or 60 deals my first year. A lot of the deals, the minimum commission was $250, and you have to split with, I had to split with my broker, and some had another broker, so I had a lot of checks for $62.50. But, it added up, and I ended up doing pretty well my first year. And I remember like leasing property, like a commercially zoned house, to a termite company. And they'd ask me questions on the lease, and I had no idea what the answer was. So I'd call my manager, and I said, hey, what's estoppel? And so he'd explain it to me. Then I'd go to the termite guy, explain to him what estoppel was. He'd sign the lease. I would leave, and I still didn't know what estoppel was. But I was able to kind of just talk my way through things.
Were you cold calling on the farmers? I mean, I know you put up signs, but
Oh,
were you ever just driving up this dirt road with cornfields or fruit trees up and just saying, hey, is Farmer Bob here?
Yeah, I'd knock on the door. I knew their names, right, because of the microfiche. And I'd knock on the doors, and they were older. And so, it seemed like everyone always liked talking about real estate, so they'd invite me in, and sometimes, they didn't have friends or something and would just talk to me, about real estate. And so, that's how I got going. And as I was putting these signs up, it's kind of funny, there's a Cushman Wakefield broker who kind of controls Fremont, and he would call me, and say, take your sign down. And I'd say, no, I got permission, from Farmer Lopez. And he goes, well, I have an exclusive with him. And I go, well, no, I've got permission. I'm not taking it down. And we would like fight. And the guy's name was Steve Beret. And so that summer, I was up in Seattle for Seafair. And we had a big group. It's all my college buddies. And Steve Beret happened to be part of the group. And so we became friends instead of enemies. And so at the end of Seafair, which was like early August, he said, why don't you just come work with me so we're not fighting, and work together. And he was at Cushman & Wakefield. And so Cushman & Wakefield was, the big company. After a couple months, I went to work for him at Cushman & Wakefield. And the following year, we sold all of Fremont. I mean, it was, the developers had a run on it. Between him and I, we didn't control the owners, but we knew them pretty well, so we were able to assemble basically all the land. At the end of the year, I think I was the 4th highest paid broker in Cushman & Wakefield in the country, and he was 3rd.
So what were you making? How much money back then?
I think it was probably $700,000.
And you're how old at the time? 24, 25?
24, 23. It was a lot of money.
Still is, but really a lot of money back then.
Yeah, I was going, well, that was easy. I go, the guy at the blackjack table was right.
And then you started doing bigger deals. You want to go off on your own. So tell us about your first deal, 300 acres in Portola Valley, and how you raised $5 million for that deal, including from a Saudi prince.
Yeah, well, I bought it from a Saudi prince. So the one thing I didn't like about being a broker, you didn't have real control over anything. And so, like I said, these guys would let me in and talk to me, and sometimes, for hours. And, I realize they don't care about selling their land. They just want someone to talk to. And a guy at Bishop Hawk, which was the first company I was at, told me the most important thing about being a broker is you need to realize when a deal will happen or can't happen, because a lot of people spin their wheels on deals that just won't happen, and have no business ever becoming a deal. And I remember I drove down to Alameda and met with this dentist who owned this big piece of property in downtown Fremont next to Macy's, and it was zoned for like a high-rise condo. And I get the listing, and I'm like, oh, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. I'm going to be rich. This is going to be the greatest project. And, after like 3 months of trying to sell it, I realized, well, there's absolutely no high-rise condo market in Fremont, and probably never will. Something that got me so excited and so jazzed, and something that I thought was going to change my life, literally was a waste of time. Zero impact, except for it kind of woke me up to have a little better control over my well-being, basically. And so that's when I moved out of brokerage, got into development. And the first thing I did, I bought this ranch in Portola Valley. And Portola Valley is right outside of Stanford and Palo Alto. And so it was 300 acres, and I bought it from a Saudi prince. And he had this Lebanese guy who kind of handled the negotiations. I tied it up for $5 million, had the deal, thought it was great. And then he goes, now what are you gonna pay me for the development right? I'm like, what are you talking about? We just cut a deal. He goes, no, for the property, I have the development rights. So I think we had to pay him like $500,000, which at the time was a lot. And so we got it done, bought it. It was zoned for 28 lots. We had 300 acres. It took over 10 years to get improved because every environmental constraint was on the property. You had this big hill that was covered in landslides. You had the San Andreas Fault run through it. You had wildlife corridors, biological corridors, and the people who were fighting me were all like Stanford professors, right? So like I have a consultant on the San Andreas Fault to show how we could stabilize everything. Well, the town's geologic committee just happened to be like the guys who started USGS, and the biology people fighting us were biology professors at Stanford. I really had to learn how to develop properly and through the environment, right? Because everyone wanted to save the environment. And so it gave me a PhD in development, well over 10 years. And I remember going to like my Stanford friends, hey, can you show up at the public hearing in front of the planning commission? They go, no. And I'm like, why? And they go, oh, my wife hates you. And they were friends. I don't think she really hated me. And I'm like, why? It's because you're ruining the environment. I go, we're not. And have to explain how we're doing and what we're doing. And so, like I said, after 10 years, it finally got approved. And the good news is it was kind of the peak in the market. So we went through a few dips on the way. It ended up being a great learning lesson. It ended up being profitable. And I have friends who actually live there today.
I hope you're enjoying this video so far, but before we jump back in, I want to know if you've ever thought about what you need to do to reach the next level of success in your life. Over the last 25 years, I've been an advisor to more than 50 companies. I've invested nearly 100, including Google, Lyft, and Seagate. And I also co-founded a company that today is worth more than $15 billion. I've been incredibly blessed in my journey, and at this stage in my life, I want to give back. I want to share the lessons I've learned so you can reach incredible success way faster than I did. In my own journey, I've learned that having the right mentor is a massive advantage to achieving our goals. I'm hugely passionate about mentoring others, and I'm looking for a few hungry entrepreneurs who are excited to take action on their journey to incredible future success. So if that's you, I've got an opportunity. In the description of this video, there's a link where you can apply to work with me. All you need to do is answer a few simple questions, and if you're a good fit, my team will reach out so we can build a game plan together. All right, now let's get back to the video. Explain to people how a long development cycle could kill a return on your investment, because people may say, all right, you sold it, let's say you bought the whole thing for $10 million and you sold it for $30 million to someone who might not get the math behind that. That may be a terrible return, and actually is a terrible return. And when you think about $20 million gain 10 years later, I mean, it's not on a risk reward basis. It's not what you should be getting on real estate development deals.
What people do, you normally judge investments by internal rates of return. And internal rate of return is basically how much money you make every year, compiling. And so if you invested 10 and made 20 over 10 years, that's a bad internal rate of return.
Probably around 4% annual compounded, something like
which
that.
You don't, which would be bad. But it's a decent multiple. So we're always internal rate of return driven, or most people are. But in our business, we're not really internal rate of return driven today. I mean, we always were early on because our investors were. But today we're more multiple driven, which means that the brand today is so strong that we could start a deal and have things pre-sold. So a lot of times we'll allocate, let's say, $100 million for a project that we think is what the capital needs are. And we end up only spending $3 million because the brand's so big, we're able to pre-sell, and so we could supplement the buyer's money with our money. Obviously, the IRR is huge when you don't spend, you don't spend any money, but we really want multiples. And so what we're driven for is just creating as much value as we can. We look at, like, if we put in $100 million, we want to make $1 billion, okay? We don't, if we put in 100, we don't want to make 20 million.
You started Discovery in 1994, and you bought 640 acres out, essentially, at that point in the middle of nowhere. It was a cattle ranch. So tell us about Mark Solenberger and Paul Fay, and what happened after Mark gave you a call.
It was around 1994, and we were early 90s for real estate, and for a lot of people were tough. It was ending the RTC days, which is the when all the SNLs basically blew up. Our motto was stay alive to 95. Since I went to high school in Arizona, I called a few friends and said, hey, I'm looking for some land, because I wanted to get out of California, because California was really, from a real estate perspective, done and gone at the time. And so I wanted to do like a big master plan community, like a Sun City, but not age restricted, but golf courses, big density, just, a big project. So that was the idea I had in my head. And so a friend of mine told this to Mark Solenberger, and Mark called me and said, hey, I have this great piece of land. They should come look at it, and it's at Pinnacle Peak. And I go, where at Pinnacle Peak? And he goes, Pinnacle Peak. And I'm like, and Pinnacle Peak is a landmark in North Scottsdale. I kept asking where, and then he finally explained to me, it's actually, you would own Pinnacle Peak. And so to me, I go, that sounds cool. I went out there. They were trying to do a 3,000 room hotel, and they were going to have a golf course that was attached to True North. And True North was kind of the hot, high-end resort course, or public course. And so they explained the deal. I go, 3,000 rooms sounds like a lot. It's going to take a lot of money to build it. The Phoenician, which is one of the great hotels you'll ever see, is in bankruptcy. The owner just went to jail. Doesn't sound like the right thing to do. And so there was a transfer from the resort density into 800 units. And so Pinnacle Peak was a mountain that had the most lush landscaping, saguaros everywhere. I mean, it was just a beautiful piece of property. Scottsdale's flat, and this is, one of the mountains in the middle of it. We were able to do 800 units. We tied it up. I got Tom Fazio out there.
You knew Tom already?
No, I did research. I did research. what were the best, again, you got to remember I didn't golf, knew nothing about golf, but the best clubs on the West Coast at the time were the Vintage Club, Maroon Creek, and the Quarry. And Tom Fazio did all three of those. So I co-called Tom Fazio. He said he wouldn't do it because he just did a course called Greyhawk. A friend of mine owned Greyhawk, so I asked him if it was okay if we could hire Tom. We were going to do a private club. His was a resort course, so people paid to play it. So he said he gave Tom permission. We went out there. Tom basically designed, which I still think is one of the best golf courses anywhere. We reduced the density from 800 units to 243 units. We did that because the landform was so impressive that everything I learned from the years in Portola Valley, I actually put to practice. Like the roads were all along the contours. We left everything in its natural state. We de-vegged all the vegetation, boxed it up, and then replanted it. So by the time the course was done, the roads were in, it looked like nothing happened to the site. It was a beautiful property. We had probably the first sales in Arizona for over $1 million for a lot. We were selling like a lot at True North was $60,000, like our cheapest lot was $250,000. So that's when I realized by investing in the amenity package, the privacy and exclusivity, you're going to get way more money than your neighbor. The lower density is a little counterintuitive because the more density, the more money you think you make. And to get more density, you'd have to do a lot of mass grading, which not only ruins the environment, but also costs a lot of money to grade. So this whole environmental, lesson I got in Portola Valley made real sense because it's really the most cost-effective way to develop. And so if you go to Estancia today, even with the homes, you can't really tell it's a development because the homes even blend into the mountain and the backdrop. It was my first project. I think I was like 34 when I started it. Like I said, I knew nothing about golf, and it's today probably still the best golf course in Arizona.
There's all kinds of ways to get sales. And when we don't have a track record, we need to resort to all kinds of things. So let's talk about Whitefish, Montana. And is your advice to people to get your first customers flying 4 people out on a private jet to come have a look? That's an expensive marketing trip.
That's kind of how it works. So at Estancia, it was a golf mecca, right? Scottsdale's known for golf. We're surrounded by some of the great golf in the country. Now, we had Tom Fazio. Everyone else had Morris Weisskopf or Jack Nicklaus. So we separated ourselves just by the definition of what we were, which was less members, in my opinion, better golf. And so the golfers kind of migrated, so I didn't have to fly people there. But I had to figure everything out on my own because people were telling me how to do things and what to do, agree with it, or I had to think about, I had to really think to figure it out. I fortunately made a lot of the right decisions, and basically the decisions were based on spending money appropriately and properly. My attitude was, okay, we're going to build this clubhouse. It's going to be the best clubhouse in the state. The course is going to be the best in the state. The food's got to be the best. Everything just has to be the best. Everyone tried to convince me to save money here and there. I didn't, right? So my attitude was, if you spend the extra 10% instead of cutting the extra 10%, that's a 20% difference, and your quality is so much better. And everyone then told me, okay, go get kiosks at the airport. Go do ads in the Wall Street Journal. They were trying to convince me to do all this stuff, and I go, it just didn't make sense. It seemed like too much of a shotgun approach. When we opened the course, I was going around meeting everyone since I wasn't golfing, and I knew who all the guests were, right? Because they were like big-time people, known people, and the members we had at the time, were fairly substantial people for Phoenix. So I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put all our marketing dollars into the course, into the place, because if they're here golfing, that means they come to Arizona and they golf. So that's your target audience. The whole place started by doing that, and I would give out hats and T-shirts, and these rich people like free stuff. So little things like that made a big difference. The comfort stations made a big difference. So it was really making the person feel like a member, where most clubs make the member feel like a member and the guests feel like a non-member and not very welcome. And I always use this line from the movie with Janet Gretzky was in. The movie was called The Heartbreak Kid. They were playing gin rummy, and they were at this fancy beach club in New York, and the loudspeaker said, "The fireworks show are for members only. All non-members, please look away." And so that's how private clubs were. And so I said, let's let the members look at the fireworks. The guests. Let's take care of the guests. And that's was our marketing. Okay. And then my next course was Cordoval, and it was a local market. We turned it and made it into a Silicon Valley CEO club, which it still is. A gentleman from Estancia helped me with it. His name was Don Valentine, who was kind of one of the founders of Silicon Valley. Sequoia Capital.
Which, for those people who don't know, they funded every big Apple. Every big company back in the day.
Cisco, Apple. And he was one of the Fairchild 5. They came out of Fairchild Semiconductors, and he went into venture, one went into PR. There's he was a big deal, and he was very helpful there. So I had these two projects, and then we started Iron Horse. Whitefish, Montana was kind of an outlier place, but it was beautiful. It had, lakes and Glacier National Park and whitewater rafting, and it had all this amazing stuff. And so when I went and visited, I go, boy, if there were the Four Seasons here, it'd be the most popular Four Seasons in the world. We bought it, but I had to get people there. I would charter like a Lear 35, and I'd bring my friends up there, and they'd go, okay, we'll come, but we're not going to buy. And I would take them fly fishing, and we just do, the Montana experience. And after 3 or 4 days, they'd be going, okay, show me some real estate. Will you show me some real estate? I go, well, I didn't think you wanted to buy. And they all ended up buying. By starting with the Estancia and Cordoval membership, especially Cordoval, because it's all big Silicon Valley executives, that helped get Iron Horse going, and then it all kind of spiraled upward from there.
I want to talk about Casamigos, but there's a lot there, so I want to take it step by step. And I want to talk about Jerry Weintraub, and you were in a movie, and then you met some interesting people, and then we'll stop the story right there, and then we'll continue it at that point.
Okay, so Jerry was like outside of my father, my grandfather, probably the third big influence and mentor in my life. He was a big personality, and when I moved to LA, he embraced me, and just his embrace gave me a lot of credibility in LA, because he's kind of known for recognizing talent. And he took Elvis Presley on tour, Frank Sinatra, and at this time he was doing the Ocean's 13 movies. I was moved to LA. He kind of moved me into his house, and the reason why I think he liked me so much, we did a project in the early 2000s called The Hideaway. It started as Country Club of the Desert, and the developers basically stole money. And so the financial partners shut it down. We ended up joint venturing it with them.
Was this nationwide?
Nationwide.
It's a big insurance company for people who don't know.
Right, Nationwide
Huge.
is on your side. Jerry wanted to do the deal, and Jerry lived at Bighorn. He was a member at the Quarry. He knew everyone at the Vintage, which are 3 of the great clubs in the desert. And everyone said, no, it's not going to work. All those clubs are kind of in coves in the mountains. And so they were telling him, this is not in the mountains, it's got view of the mountains, it's in the flat, and it will never work. We bought it, we repositioned it, and probably sold 600 lots in 18 months, and it was a huge success. And so, Jerry's like, who is this kid? And that, so he kind of sought me out and embraced me. Was very, just very helpful to me going forward. I had cameos in some of the ocean movies, and I was let's say on Ocean's 13, I was like the 14th person, right? I would go with them to all the premieres. We'd hang out. I was probably there every day at Warner Brothers when they were shooting. I became very close, obviously, with George and the cast.
And then you met two guys who were in the movie. Well, one guy who was in the movie, and he was best friends with another guy.
Yeah. So George obviously was in the ocean movies, and George has this group of friends, right? And they're basically his friends from acting school when he struggled and first came to LA, and they're all still his best friends. So George is a very good friend and loyal person. And Rande was one of those friends. He didn't go to that acting school with him, but they just became good friends because I think Cindy and George shared at one time the same agent.
Just to make it clear to people who don't drink tequila, we're talking about George Clooney, Rande Gerber, and
Cindy Crawford.
And Cindy Crawford.
Yeah, that was how I met him. Of his group, George is pretty good too at culling the herd in his group, because if someone does something he doesn't like, he's pretty good about, I have too many friends, you're not my friend anymore. And he's really good at being loyal, but if you break that loyalty, he's pretty good at abandoning you as well. And so I was fortunate that he had his friend group already established. He wasn't looking for more friends, but because of Jerry, we became really close friends, and Rande and George ended up being one of the first buyers at El Dorado. They built these two beautiful Legarreta houses. He's a very famous Mexican architect, and they called the house Casamigos.
Which means House of Friends.
House of Friends. It's a made-up word, but it means House of Friends. Is where he'd bring his boys, right, for vacations and, everyone golf and play basketball and, things like that. And I was, became part of that group. I was lucky enough to, do that because they're all great guys. We were drinking different tequilas. We didn't really love anything, and so we decided to make our own, but just for ourselves, right? I figured I could put it at all my clubs, Rande could put them in his bars, and George could just drink a lot. So between the three of us, I thought we would have a business. And so we went to this distillery, and we said we like Clase Azul, but it's a little sweet, and we like 42, but it's a little bitter. And so we came up with this formula that if you actually do a blind taste test, we won every time. Because 42 on its own isn't that bitter, but when you taste it next to us, it's very bitter. And Clase Azul is so sweet when you taste it next to us. So we kind of came up with what we thought was the perfect recipe. We did all these taste tests, we won it all. Then we went to Southern Wine and Spirits, and we said, hey, what do you think? And they tasted it and said, we love it, we think you've got a winner, we'll take it.
Can we stop it there for just 1 second, because I think this is critical to the story. Tell people what Southern Wine and Spirits is, and it's very hard to get on that truck because someone else comes off that truck, right?
Yeah,
it's just hard to get that deal. So what was that? What is the process, and how did you get onto that truck and that distribution system?
Okay, so Southern Wine and Spirits is the distributor for maybe 80% of all the liquor in the United States. We started with this gentleman, Larry Rubo, who sold. Him and Steve Wynn had the distributorship for Nevada. Southern bought it. Larry ran it. So we came in, and Larry liked it, and he said, you guys need a Blanco to go with it, and we'll take it. And I said, well, we don't drink the Blanco, we drink the Repo, so we don't want a Blanco. And he goes, well, 85% of the market's Blanco. And I said, okay, we'll do a Blanco. So we created a Blanco to go with it. They said, if you do 20,000 cases your first year, it'll be a huge success. We went out and we made 20,000 cases. It cost us $1.8 million, so we each wrote a check for $600,000. We sold the 20,000 cases the first 2 days. We did a little road show to the different distributors, because they're the ones who really buy it from us, and then they sell it to the stores or the restaurants. And we sold out literally the first day. So we made another 20 from that first check we wrote of 600 each. We never had to put any more money in because it just kept selling faster, faster, and faster.
So I think it's very interesting. Explain what a roadshow is, and then I remember my good friend John Terzian, who's in my wedding party with Madison, who you also know, my wife. You went into the Nice Guy one night and you said, John, I want you to carry my Casamigos there. And of course, it's hard for him to carry new spirits because, again, he has relationships with people, and just like you, he's got a lot of venues. But I remember thinking, yeah, it's really interesting, you know, Mike Meldman, who's a very successful guy, who's a centimillionaire, going into a restaurant to ask a guy that owns a restaurant, I mean, it's a one-off, and obviously his high-profile places, to carry your tequila. I love that story.
Yeah, well, we worked it. I mean, all three of us worked it pretty hard.
It's hard to say no to you.
Yeah, well, one of the good things is, like, Discovery is a great platform for, you know, good products. What I did is we made Casamigos bars at every project. And so you get it to the right people. And when I say influencers, I don't mean like influencers like people are used to. I mean like guys who own Kroger's, guys who own Albertsons. And like at Baker's Bay, the money behind Albertsons, Safeway, both were members at Baker's Bay. The chairman was a member at Madison. You know, I went to them, hey, can you do me a favor? You know, we just started this tequila. Could you put it in, you know, Safeway and Albertsons? And they go, absolutely. We'll make it like our house tequila. Any Safeway, Albertsons you go into, or any of your people go into, and we don't have it, we'll put it there the next day. So I'm kind of the guy who is the favor giver. You know, I don't like to ask for things, and I don't normally ask for things. But this was kind of an easy ask, right? Because they're selling tequila anyway. We didn't have to pay for anything. It's a pay-for-play business, even though it's illegal to do that, not supposed to be. But it's amazing the shakedown you would get. Obviously, we didn't play that way. And even like my friends would try to shake me down. I go, look, if you don't do this, you're never going to El Dorado again for the rest of your life. He goes,
or
okay.
any other club.
Yeah, he goes, okay. We were able to really get it in places quickly and easily. We had the distribution because Southern was really, really behind us. And there's the COO of Southern was this guy named Brad Vassar, who's one of my best friends, who became one of my best friends. And he grew up in Sonora, California, which is kind of up by Angels Camp. It's kind of the Go Country, and it's pretty, you know, a lot of meth labs. And I mean, it's pretty rough, but it's literally the Go Country. And one of my first projects that I ever did, and this was like 5 years before Estancia, was a golf community called Saddle Creek, and it was right outside of Sonora. When I found out he was from Sonora and that I did Saddle Creek, there was a immediate bond about that. And he was a huge help because whatever he said, anyone at Southern had to do. And he's a scary guy, could be a scary guy.
Part of having consumer success is you've got one shot at it, right? Someone goes out, they taste something, it could be a product, could be a software product. I mean, as a VC and being a board member for now 50 plus companies, we tell the founders, don't launch something before it's ready, because you get one shot and then they're not coming back. You went through 400 different variations of Casamigos before you actually said, all right, we got it now?
Yeah, well, that was Rande. I mean, I was happy with the first, the first one, but Randy's very particular. His palate's very, you know, good. And so he really worked it hard. And we're doing a non-alcoholic beer right now, and we had the tasting yesterday. There was like 4 of them. I go, this is it. Everyone agreed. And Randy still, we could, you know, still make it better, which is good because that's, you know, what Randy adds value that way. We got it right, And then we knew it was going to work because everyone liked it, right? And the juice was good. And if it wasn't, no matter who was behind it, it wouldn't work. And you've seen a lot of people since our success try to imitate it, and it's just not, a lot of it's just not that good, so it doesn't work. If we didn't have good juice, no matter who was behind it, it wouldn't have worked. And the reason it worked, besides the three of us all had different strengths and attributes and contributions, it was good.
4 years later, after starting Casamigos, you sold it for $1 billion, $700 up front, $300 over 10-year earn-out period. What are you thinking that day?
That we sold too cheap. I was the only one who really didn't want to sell, but you don't want to be the schmuck who, turned down $1 billion and then agave dries up or something like that. So I think we got the balance of the billion in a year and a half that they thought would take 10 years. And then they just kept re-upping the contracts. So we ended up doing much better than that. I mean, it was a great success, just a great success. And it's also fun to have success in a different business for all three of us. And it gave the three of us, just reasons to hang out more and be together and go do different things for the tequila.
There are apparently 28 benefits to drinking Casamigos tequila. You've assigned it a comfort station at your Dominican Republic resort, and I just got to read 3 of these. It fixes broken hearts, it relaxes your socks, and it makes your hair soft and full. Was this FDA tested? How did that come about?
Yeah, I think my favorite one was I've been on a tequila diet.
Right.
I lost 3 days.
Let's move on to the clubs themselves, because I think one of the things is, you have a lot of celebrities at these clubs, and I know privacy is mentioned, but I'm going to mention some names because this is all public information. I'm not disclosing, but you guys like Michael Jordan and Tom Brady and Bill Gates and the Google founders. I mean, it's everybody. You have the Kardashians, and again, this is public. I'm not, sharing anything Justin Bieber, but you're selling cool in some regard, aren't you? I mean, it's luxury, it's cool, it's family, but people want to be cool.
Yeah, and it probably goes back to my college days in the beginning because, like I said, I was the history major, the non-nerd, I always say I was probably the dumbest guy at Stanford because I was the only one who went into real estate because everyone else went into technology. But I always had the big parties, the fun parties, and was kind of always turning my nerdy friends, into, fun friends. So that was kind of who I was, and how I started. And I think Discovery now, because the brand's gotten so well known and big, that it's become, aspirational for a lot of people, whether you're, a businessman, an athlete, a movie star, whatever whoever you are, own a truck company, whatever you do I think it's become a very aspirational, not only investment, but part of people's life.
Let's talk about the financing of one of these clubs. At the beginning, you took on debt. Now you don't have to take on debt, right? There's 15,000 members or so.
Yeah, we never took on debt, and that's probably the reason we survived '08. I was always a believer in equity in land because land can become very illiquid, right? And the land cycles go up and down. And even though, we create things pretty quick and sell pretty quick, so we kind of get in and out, or at least have enough success that when a downturn comes that we're okay. Even though like '08, even with no debt, it was hard because our markets slow down. They become very inelastic, which means no one's buying at any price. And so you just have to wait it out. And '08 was probably an 18-month cycle, which doesn't sound that bad. But when you're going through the 18 months, it was pretty bad and difficult. But since we had no debt, we were okay. We survived it, and we ended up buying Yellowstone because of it, and McKenna, and some great projects. So we try to stay away from debt. We probably should use debt more to build quicker, to get more houses built faster on our account. But I've always been not wanting to put debt on, just because when you do have a downturn, there's no way out.